Episode 72, The Pause Principle with Jill Pack.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
Just like the seasons change as the earth moves around the sun, our lives also have seasons that change as we grow older and pass through different phases of our lives. While we are each aware of those seasons, the change from one season to another can often be difficult and hard to navigate. Coach Jill Pack helps women of faith make the transition from one season to the next by taking them through a process called the Pause Principle. She discusses what this is and how it works on the podcast today.
Jill Pack is with me today, and I wish you guys could see her. She has the funnest glasses. She's wearing yellow, which is my favorite color. And so those two things alone make me really excited for the conversation. However, I know what we're going to talk about is even better than glasses and a yellow shirt. So Jill, before we get started, will you introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Jill Pack and I'm a life coach. I have my own business called Seasons Coaching. I live in Mendon, which is in Cache Valley, Utah. And I met my husband at Utah State. We've been married over 32 years. And 30 of those years have been in this valley. We've raised 5 children here, and 3 of them are married. And so we have 3 bonus in-laws children, and we have 2 grandchildren. And I just have found joy in coaching women of faith as they navigate different seasons of life, and especially women that are in a similar season as myself, which is older.
Listen, I used to think that this season of life that you're talking about was so old.
Yeah. So
when I was a teenager or even in my 20s, and now I'm like, what was I even thinking? It's not even that. So It makes me laugh.
Yeah. So that's good. And I work with women as they kind of navigate these different seasons and as they learn to reconnect with themselves too after those different seasons of life.
Which I think is so important because number one, I don't know about you or people listening today, but when I was growing up, I never thought beyond that phase of my life of having kids and having my kids living at home. And I'm entering this phase where half of my kids are out of the home now. And my mind had never gone to that place. Like I never had a plan. I had a great plan for when my kids were for having babies and being a stay-at-home mom, but I didn't have a plan for after that. So yeah, I think this is such an important topic.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought, you grow in your teen and your early, young adult. That's where you learn and grow. And then you just live life.
Yeah. Like it kind of just plateaus and there's nothing more. Like
we ride off into the sunset.
That is probably fair to say about men and women. We probably don't really think beyond into to this stage of our lives. Like we think there's a plateau. And to be honest, I have seen more growth in my life over the last couple of years than I've ever seen. And so it's a space that I think is very discounted and under thought about. How's that? Is that a phrase? Under thought about?
Yeah.
I think that works.
Sounds good.
Anyway, but I'm glad we're having it.
Yeah.
And one more question before we move forward. You said you coach women of faith. Is there a specific religion involved? I mean, is it just members of the Church of Jesus Latter-day Saints, or is it
not
just
necessarily? No, I've had some clients that are Christian, but they aren't members of the church, right?
Okay.
But I think that, my membership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is really a large part of who I am. And so that's my frame of reference.
Yes.
And so that's what I use to guide me through this but it's not limited to that. But that's my point of reference.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for clarifying that. I always just think it's interesting to know. And people do ask me that sometimes, why a directory that just has coaches who are members of this faith? And I just want to say, like, if you have a religious background, a lot of times you want to find someone to work with who has that same value system, those same beliefs, because a lot of conversation doesn't even need to be had between you and a coach, because they just understand some of your beliefs about things, and it saves a lot of time, and you can kind of just cut to the chase sometimes.
So true. So true. Yeah.
Okay, Jill, how did you come into coaching? Actually, I'm curious about that.
So about 4 years ago, my youngest was entering her senior year, and my other 4 had left the home. So I had 5 kids. And so I was entering that season of everybody going to be gone. And I kind of found a place that myself in a place, I'm facing empty nesting. And I just remember, and I still can, it's almost tangible because I remember just really going through a time of like, now what? Like, what's my purpose in life? I've spent the last 28 years at that point being a stay-at-home mom, which I did love. I loved, it was hard, but beautiful, right? And it's exactly what I wanted to do. But now I was in a new place in life, a new season, and I had really lost connection with myself over those 28 years, right? It was what we've talked about. Like, now what? This is a season I never really planned for. And so I had been so focused on serving my loved ones that I really had become disconnected with things I enjoyed and where I saw myself in the future, and I've heard it said, like, midlife crisis. I think that's where I was, right? But then I heard it reframed once as a midlife awakening. And I just latched onto that. I thought, if I could reflect back on the growth that I've had over the last few years, it would be an awakening, right? Like, I've reconnected with who I am because of coaching. And everything that I've learned has helped me to remember who I am and understand that life isn't just happening to me. I think for so long I lived reactionary, but I've come to a place where I really believe that life is happening for me. And we're all sent here to learn and grow, as in every season of life. I think each season has its uniqueness and its value. One isn't necessarily more important than the other. And so as I have found coaching and then, fast forward to where I am now, the tools I've learned actually help me in seasons I didn't know were coming, that I've entered to, right? Like, adding in-laws into your family can be a tricky situation. Becoming a grandma, or just, my parents were aging, and the last couple of years have been challenging as we've cared for them. And then eventually they both passed this last year and a half. And so navigating that, and then just my husband became a bishop in a YSA ward. And so that's a different season. Now I can be more deliberate in how I show up in that setting. And so all these tools that I've learned have helped me embrace each season and enjoy each one for what it is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think one of the key words that I grabbed onto there is the word deliberate. Our life does happen outside of us, right? Things do happen. And we have the choice in how we are going to handle those things. We can be reactionary, or we can be deliberate in the way that we choose to navigate all those different things. And I think you said it really well. Like, it does. I remember it feeling like a crisis. I still kind of feel like I'm going through a little bit of crisis because, gosh, I went for 18 years without having any major changes in my family, right? Kids, except for having children, but adding children into the mix, but everything just felt safe and secure all the time. And then all of a sudden, like, the first one leaves, and it's like this domino effect of constant change that just seems to be happening in my life now. And I keep thinking, how was there no change for so many years and now all of it's happening all at one time? And it can feel very disorienting too. I do think, and I see such great value in learning how to be deliberate in how you handle every single thing that does end up coming your way, all the changes, whether you expect them. I mean, you do expect children to leave the home, and you do, expect people to eventually get married so that you're adding in-laws in, but there are plenty of things that aren't expected, and just learning how to be who you want to be on purpose, I think is so important.
Yeah. So it just enables you to actually participate, be an active participant in your life versus a spectator. And I think so often when we get kind of in the groove of motherhood and life and day to day, we can find ourselves a spectator instead of a participant. And so I think that's another thing that I've kind of taken away from I want to be an active participant.
Yeah, that's a great visual, actually. I'm thinking of my season of life where I've spent so many hours being a spectator at different sporting events or different things for my kids. And anyway, it just gives me a great visual, something to think about. I'm sure our listeners too. But all right. So I'm curious, when people come to you and are wanting help with whatever it is that they're wanting help with, because I'm sure it's not always just something specific. There's probably many different things that people come to you with. How do you like to work with them? What is the process you start taking them through? What is a tool or anything that you have found to be really useful in that?
So I've experimented with a few different things, but recently I kind of created this process that had just really resonated with me. And as I've reflected back into that season of life that I was living before I found coaching, I worked through this process. As I came to coaching, I learned each piece of this process, and I call it the pause principle. But as I've applied this principle, and as I teach my clients each part of this principle, it just can be such a beautiful, useful tool as we try to create change in our life. But again, I just think there's so much power in pausing. I just think we're so used to going one thing to the next, and we don't allow ourselves to pause. I think that nowadays we hear a lot more about mindfulness and meditation and awareness. Like, that is becoming pretty common to hear about that. But I think that hearing about it and understanding it, but then applying it are two different things. And so, so one of the tools and I have a freebie that I'm trying to get out, and I've created a course on it as well that I'm going to be offering soon. And it's called exactly that, the pause principle. And there's 3 parts to it that I just think can be used alone or in conjunction with each other. And it can just bring so much empowerment and self-awareness and ability to just embrace that season that we're in, no matter what season it is.
Okay. One of the things you said was it's such a powerful tool when we want to create change in our life. And this is what I think is so fascinating, that some of us really do see things that we want to change in our life. And some of us also are like, I'm pretty happy with the way my life is. Right. And I want to offer to anybody who is in that boat that's like, yeah, I'm pretty happy, that what if there's more? I think that's a question that I love to ask in so many different areas of my life. Yeah, we're pretty happy, but what if there's more available to me? And so that was just a thought that I had when you were sharing that I think is really good to think about.
Yeah. And I think that it goes back to that idea of being a spectator or a participant, right? We get in that groove, that homeostasis, right? Where we just settle in, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, what if there's more? What if you could be a more active participant in your own life instead of watching it go by?
Can you share with us a little bit about this pause principle? So we can just take away some things with us today that I know will be super helpful.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So the first part is the pause to process. And basically, on your podcast, processing emotion is talked about. And yes, that works great when we're experiencing an elevated emotion and to just let ourselves process it. But I think it's just as powerful to understand what we're feeling in not those elevated emotional states. Like, what is it that we're feeling, and just understanding what that feels like in us. And for a long time, I didn't realize that I created my emotions, right? And with this work, that was one of the first things I really came to learn. And I thought I was at the mercy of them, right? And that emotions just happened to me. Somebody would do something, it affected me. And this was such a disempowering place to be. I was believing that somebody else had control over my emotions. There were relationships in my life at the time that I felt were hard. And I believe that certain people in my life should choose and act differently than they were. And I believe that when they wouldn't do what I believed they should, I would cry and I would wallow in this emotion. And I say wallow because I don't think I was really processing that emotion. I was feeling sorry for myself and I was just wallowing. And when I would finish the wallowing, then I would beat myself up and tell myself that I was a victim of somebody else's choices, right? So it kept this loop going. It just would happen over and over again. And then I realized that when I realized I was the creator of the emotions because of what I was thinking, it was just like an aha moment, right? And that I could take ownership of what I was actually feeling while at the same time processing it. And when I learned how to do this, then I was able to move through these emotions instead of, right, the typical resisting, reacting, and avoiding, and that they weren't going to hurt me. And just by acknowledging and naming them, then I could lessen the grip that these emotions had on me. Because for so long, I just felt a victim to these emotions. That just was so powerful. I've loved to learn more about just the power of our emotions and how they fuel how we show up in our life. And honestly, I was not showing up in my life the way I really wanted to, because I was at the effect of these emotions. So once I learned to pause and allow myself to process, that in of itself was life-changing all on its own without the other parts of this principle.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because when we're in the middle of it and we're experiencing emotion, which for the most part, most of us don't really even recognize what's happening. We know we feel something. We're pretty crummy at labeling what it is we're feeling. And even just, I think this is part of that process you're talking about, is even just saying, hey, I'm feeling this emotion is part of that pause.
Yeah.
But without that, we actually, we think we're showing up or we're reacting the way that, like, in a way that we have to. We think that we have to react a certain way just because I'm feeling this way. And we don't really take time to realize that we actually have a choice in how we are going to play out that emotion in our life.
Yeah. That as soon as we can take ownership of it, we have control over them.
Yeah.
And that's just such a more empowering place to be.
Yeah, for sure.
At the mercy of them. Yeah.
So that was step one.
That was step one. And so the second piece to this is pause to ponder. And I think for a long time, I didn't really ask myself what I wanted to create in my life. Like, really ask myself, what do I want to create? Right. And how can I reconnect with myself and who I want to be? And so once I discovered that I was able to process the emotions I was creating myself, it actually opened up space for me to pause and ponder what I actually wanted in my life, who I wanted to be, what I wanted to create and put into the world, right, while I'm here. And so that piece of not processing my emotions also blocked me from creating life on purpose. And so like I said before, I feel like many times in my life I was living reactionary, and I wasn't allowing God to help me write my story, to help me do something different with my life. And so the story I was actually writing for myself was I was the starring role of the victim, right? Instead of the hero. And so by allowing myself that space and that pause to ponder, I actually started to discover more about myself and rediscover things that I liked to do that were separate from what my life was before that point, right? And that all of a sudden I could focus on things that I enjoyed. And instead of believing that I was at the mercy or the victim of my circumstance, I was now a creator. And so just really taking the time to ponder has allowed me to move away from being actually more focused on myself. It sounds kind of confusing because you're like, oh, well, if you're pondering and you're only asking what you want in your life, then that's kind of selfish. You're kind of focused inward. But I think when we reconnect with ourselves, it allows us to connect with God and others at a deeper, higher level. Mm-hmm. And it's just allowing that space to open yourself up to pondering and questioning and wondering and dreaming and desiring, right? And like you talked last week on Instagram, right? Just that idea of wanting something more, like that's cool. Like what could be created, what could be experienced that we aren't now because we aren't pausing to ponder what we really want to bring to the world.
Yeah, we hear this phrase a lot, like, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be in the world? What do I want to bring to the world? And I think, to put it really simply, what that really means is, how are you going to show up, or how are you going to react when your child does something you don't want them to do? Mm-hmm. How are you going to, what are the words that are going to come out of your mouth when your spouse says something that you don't agree with? I mean, all the things, right? That's ultimately what we mean when we say, who do you want to be? How are you going to show up? Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that is a really good point that you make, and something that is kind of a consequence of that. You said you felt like the villain or the victim in your life. And, just like any story, anytime there is a victim in a story, it's because there is somebody who is a villain. And mm-hmm. so when we feel that way, when we feel that we are at the effect or at the mercy of all the things that are happening in our life, whether it be the people in our life, or even sometimes I think we feel like a victim to God, like he could control this. Why is he not, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It always makes somebody else a villain. It always makes somebody else the bad guy, whether it's your husband or your kids or even Heavenly Father, right? I'm sure we've all felt anger towards him, and he can handle it. That's not the problem. But it's really hard to operate in that victim villain space.
Well, and I think you could also say that there are times when we play both roles. We're the victim and the villain, right? Like,
yes,
we make choices and then we beat ourselves up because of those choices. So we're at the mercy of things maybe we didn't do like we thought we could. And so we ruminate on those things that we wish we'd done differently. And so we're almost at the mercy of being the villain, our own selves. So yeah,
we are. We're at the mercy of our own brains. Yeah. And that's the key here, is actually being able to see that we don't have to be like, our brains have the capacity to kind of think separate of us in some way, of our true nature. And we get to learn how to distinguish between those two. Okay. So the first step is pause to process. The second step is pause to ponder. Mm-hmm. Number three is
pause to protect. And as we are taking time to pause to process and ponder, we also need to really evaluate what our priorities are. Now we know what we want, like what is really our priority? What matters to us? Where do we need to say no in our life with intention? And where would it benefit us to say yes? What opportunities, right? And so I think that once I began to kind of reframe my story, and I began to discover what really was important to me, what my priorities were, and what my values were, I began to pause to protect those. What did I need to do? What did I really, who do I really want to be? And what would I need to do to become that person? Right. And what ways can I show up in my life that represent those values that are important to me? And again, when I say, what do we need to say no to or yes to? I know a lot of times we focus on like activity, someone's asked us to do something, and, we say yes because we're a people pleaser. And so we need to learn to say no. Like, that's a real thing. But for me, that really wasn't where I needed to say yes and no to. I needed to start saying no to being the victim of my circumstance. I needed to start saying no to putting other people in charge of my emotions. I needed to start saying no to showing up in my life reactionary and not in line with who I want to be, right? When my adult child is choosing differently, am I going to love them anyway? Or do I show up in that relationship withdrawn in not a fun way, right? Or not an engaged way, right? I'm allowing someone else's choice dictate how I show up in that relationship. And I needed to start saying no to those things. But then I also needed to start saying yes to being uncomfortable, right? And that ties back to those emotions in the beginning, right? Like, for a long time, I avoided discomfort. And I just have started to put myself out there and saying yes to opportunities like this podcast. Is so out of my comfort zone, but it meant saying yes to all of who I am, right? The good, the bad, recognizing that I'm a human, I'm doing the best I can, and I do have something to offer, right? And ultimately saying yes to love. I want to show love. I want to be love. I want to show up in this world in a loving, kind way. I want to align my priorities with who I really am trying to become. And all three of these steps really, it comes down to what you said before: intentionally, deliberately. Each one of these pieces is a practice of intention. And just creating that pause around each one of these, I think, just helps bring us more in line with who we really want to become. And that's why I love it. It's just, as I've applied it, it's just helped me kind of realign and just create a season of life that is truly an awakening and a rejuvenation and just joy, actually.
I think the beauty of all three of those components is that it creates safety for us, meaning that we often don't want to try new things, or say the yes or say no to things for this reason, because we are afraid of the chatter that will happen in our brains when we do something that we don't like because we're trying something new, or when we, all of those things work together so well for us to learn how to create safety within our own brain, so that we know, yes, whatever happens, come what may, I've got my own back. I know how to handle these situations now. And they might be uncomfortable, but I know how to keep myself safe mentally and emotionally, and I can handle all these situations.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, as we apply these, we're being intentional and deliberate, but at the same time, we're incorporating that pause. We're inviting room for the spirit. When we are emotionally mature, intelligent, right? Or however you want to describe it, when we are taking care of ourselves emotionally, right? And when we are considering what direction we want to go and who we want to be and what our values are, and we open space in all of that, the spirit can help us. The spirit can teach us. But when we're operating in a place of fear or judgment or self-loathing, right? Or disconnection. All of those emotions drain us and block the influence of the Spirit. And I think also pondering, when we allow space to ponder, there's room for the Spirit to speak to us. There's room for it. And then when we're protecting and we're choosing yes and no, we're taking these deliberate steps, and we go and can receive inspiration on the path. And we're not afraid to fall down and fail. We know that we're in line with who we are. And so we're going the right direction. And the Spirit can confirm that to us.
So true and so good. Okay, before we wrap it up here, I can just hear people in their minds thinking, yeah, well, I've lived my life this long. It's going to be way too hard to try to create some change in my life.
Yes. Yes.
I want to know your rebuttal to that.
Well, I'm living proof. That's all I can say. Like, just for a long time, I was in that mindset. Like, this is a midlife crisis. Life is over. Like, you hit a point, all your kids are gone. Now you're old. Now what are you going to do? Right.
Yes.
And I've entered this season, and it really has been an awakening, a reconnection. It's just so beautiful. And I've learned that it's never too late to learn new things. I made a sales funnel. I had never done that before, right? Like, I'm discovering these things. And I just think we were meant to have joy. And that just doesn't mean the first half of our life. That means our whole life. Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother created us to experience joy. And there isn't a timeline on that. There's not an end date. It's always. And so if we can just embrace whatever season it is, whether we're 20, 30, 53, if we can just be open to all of it, it can actually just be so beautiful. That season you're in right now can just be full of beauty. Yeah.
I can't help but say this. My people will often ask me, do you have a favorite season? And I don't know why I get asked that. I think because we have a lot of different hobbies that we do throughout the year. And I cannot say that I have a favorite. I love every season. I'm always kind of ready to go into the next one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I love them all so much because they all bring their own different, unique package of fun. And so I have to believe that about seasons of our life too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm the same way. That I think that's why I live in northern Utah. There's all the seasons. Sometimes winter seems a little longer than the rest. I think they should stay in their own season.
I think so. Just stay in their own lane, but they're not doing that very well.
You do spring, you do summer, you do fall, you do winter, and just do it. Don't overlap. Don't try to rain on someone else's parade. But I think that's what makes life beautiful. And I think, if you think about the seasons, right? Like, they're so different. And you could even consider winter death, right? And fall is dying, and then new birth and full life. Like, there's just all that dynamic to it. But that's what makes it so beautiful, is that they aren't exactly the same, that they bring that variety. And I think our seasons of life are going to include hard things and difficult things and pain and discouragement. But on the other side of that, there's that beauty, there's that joy, there's that happiness that we can find because of those hard times. Like, spring is as beautiful as it is because of winter. And so I think when we can embrace every season for its uniqueness, there's just so much beauty there.
Yeah, so true. It's such a good point, right? Like, the different phases are beautiful because of the one prior or any of the ones prior. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay. Before we head off today, Jill, I would love for you to share with people where they can find more of you. And we will link to all these things in the show notes, but I just think it's important for them to hear it straight from you.
Yeah. So I have a website. It's seasons-coaching.com. You can find me on Instagram, seasons_coaching. and on Facebook, seasons.life.coaching. That's the joy of not getting the same name on all the things.
So fun, isn't it?
Yeah. And I am going to be launching a podcast in March, and it's going to be called Seasons of Joy. And
oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. And I'm excited for that. So hopefully when this is airing, there will be some episodes.
Yes, there will be. That is exciting. And that's another thing too, right? Like there's a big learning curve with doing a podcast.
Yeah.
And so many things. And sometimes we just think, oh, I'll never be able to figure that out. Like I'm too old to figure that out. And this is just one of those things. Sales funnel, podcast, all the things.
And I've just, I think you can have a mindset of like, oh, I don't know how to do that. But for me, it's just like, I'm going to figure that out. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. I think, is it Marie Forleo who says everything is figure outable? And that is just a motto to live by, I think.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here today. I think this is,
thank you for having me.
It's been a real treat. So anyway, thanks everybody for being here with us. Join us again next week. And we'd love for you to leave us a review and share this with your friends. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.